Hi, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on the EUDR, or the EU Deforestation Regulation, and how it can strengthen both forests and the forest industry. My name is Philippa Nuttall. I'm a freelance journalist and editor of Sustainable Views. And so perhaps before we start, if we just zoom out a little bit in terms of deforestation. So back in 2014, companies, financial institutions and governments made various high-profile commitments to achieve net zero deforestation by 2020, as part of the New York Declaration on Forests. Then again at COP26 in 2021 in Glasgow, countries agreed to end and reverse deforestation by 2030. And we also now have the Global Biodiversity Framework. But nonetheless, deforestation continues apace, as we all know. So as part of this solution, the EU came forward with the EUDR, which has been fairly controversial and come under fire from various quarters since its inception. It's finally supposed to come into application at the end of this year after a 12-month delay, but it now looks increasingly likely to be caught up in the EU's omnibus or simplification agenda, which is focused on cutting red tape and growth and jobs, with very little, if any, analysis of the various benefits, both environmental and economic, that can come from regulations like the EUDR. The timber sector is clearly the obvious sector which is impacted by such a regulation, but it's also a sector that already has plenty of experience in supply chain traceability. So in today's session, we're going to look at what the EUDR means for the European timber sector and how the sector is already working to prepare for compliance. So to discuss this subject, we have a very impressive panel. We have Jan Dubal, who is the EUDR specialist for the Czech Competent Authority. Peter Jan de Smet, who is the CEO of Decospan, Anders Tivell, a Swedish forest owner, Tara Ganesh, who's the team leader on timber at Earthsight, Anand Punya, who's the Chief Engagement and Partnerships Officer with the Forest Stewardship Council. And at the end of the session, the campaigns coordinator from Fern, Hannah Mowat, will come in to summarise what we've heard today and where this takes us. So without further ado, Jan, I will ask you to give us a bit of your insight from the Czech Republic side. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate on this webinar. So my name is Jan Dubal. I work for the Czech Forestry Institute, which is the competent authority for EU timber regulation and EU deforestation regulation in the Czech Republic, together with the Ministry of Agriculture. Our institute is organization established by the ministry, so we work in close cooperation. My role in the EUDR is in the international relations work group. I work with my teammates, with my colleagues on let's say connection to Brussels, to European Commission, but also cooperation with the member states, with third countries, and with international organization. Also, my focus and of my colleagues is to information system and geolocation. Geolocations, of course, providing, let's say, general guidance and information which is necessary for the operators and stakeholders in the scope of EUDR. My background is in forestry. I'm forester, and I also participated in the negotiations on EUDR. So hopefully we will proceed with the regulation in the sense that it will be useful not only for the goals of the European Union, but also in the interests of operators, stakeholders, and especially of the small forest owners. In the Czech Republic, we are really focusing in the last years on the guidance aspect of the regulation. We are trying to provide as much information to public, to operators, to stakeholders about EUDR and its, let's say, implementation and consequences for different players in the sector. The Czech Republic is a landlocked country. We don't have harbors, so we are focusing not only on importers, but mostly on domestic producers. And it includes not only small forest owners or smallholders, which are, of course, in the focus of the regulation, but also, let's say, bigger players in the industry. So we are trying to provide some kind of guidance and information sharing to them. trying to give them the latest information on the developments of EUDR, what's going on and what's necessary from the side of the Commission and from the side of the competent authorities and the perspective of the competent authorities. Regarding the support for small forest owners or the smallest forest owners in general, it's very important in the Czech Republic. Czech Republic has 30% of its land covered by forests, and 20% of these are private persons who are owning very small portions of the forests. Every forest owner in the Czech Republic needs to have a forest management plan. And from the 90s, there is this big shift in the digitalization. So from the 90s in the previous century, we have all the forest management plan digitalized and stored in the information and data center. So I believe that we can say that the information on forest is sufficient on the side of the, let's say, not only the state, but also forest owners. Only difficulty is to give this information to the small forest owners or forest owners to provide it into the information system and make it part of the due diligence. The competent authority for Czech Forestry Institute and the Ministry of Agriculture is now working on the projects how to give the forest owners the geolocation information in the form of GeoJSON file, which is necessary for the information system and all the other tasks from the due diligence. The system is now worked on. It will be finished hopefully in the second half of 2025. So it's ready for the EUDR to take the effect. And we are focusing on providing the information directly to the forest owners through the system so-called FLPIS, which is the forestry LP system, which will include the forest management plan of the owner and will be able to export the GeoJSON file from this system with all the necessary information and on the choice how the geo information will be exported to GeoJSON format. So it will be more detailed. But also the Ministry of Agriculture is now working on the, let's say, more publicly available tool, which will be part of the public geoportal for LPIS, for the land parcel information system. And this publicly available geoportal will in the future, in the near future, include also forestry parcels and again include the export function to the GeoJSON file in the format for the information system. Except of this, we are of course working on general providing information and guidance to the operators as much as is in our powers of the institute. So thank you for the introduction.
Thank you, Jan. That's a great overview, and sounds like lots is happening in the Czech Republic, and that you're all moving in the right direction. There's a lot of discussion around geolocation. Perhaps you could give us a bit more information in terms of sort of how ready you are in terms of geolocation and how much more needs to be done so it's fit for purpose for EUDR.
I believe the system, the information is there. It's in the national information system. So now we are working on technical ways how to give this information in the GeoJSON format, which is really necessary for the information system of the European Commission, information system for EUDR. This is our primary goal now, to have this specifically and with the specifications of the European Commission, because the GeoJSON needs to have some parameters to work correctly, and we are working on this.
Super, great. Thank you very much. We'll come back to you shortly for a few more questions, but we're now going to move to Peter Jan de Smet, who is the CEO of Deforestation, which is a Belgian wood company. Thank you, Peter Jan. Sorry, I think you're still muted.
Thank you for that, Philippa. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Jan de Smet. I am CEO of Deforestation. Deforestation is a family-owned company, born, I would say, in 1978. We are a wood veneer processing group. So and also a timber group. So our main, I would say, 90% of our raw materials that we use is wood veneer. And then 10% also we have oxo mills. Our company is active in 5 European countries. So our production footprint is 100% at the moment European, being active in Belgium, France, Czech Republic, Croatia, and Portugal. And we export on a global scale. So I would say that the group export at the moment around to 83 countries. So in terms of the EUDR, yes, our main focus, I would say, as we are on the veneer side, is oak and walnuts. A lot of the oaks are coming from Europe. So I could say also we were very well prepared for it. So our group always have been having a very proactive approach, I would say, on the EUDR for sure last year. So a lot of us, the whole group was ready for that. A lot of investments have been done in that. And unfortunately of that, then everything got postponed. So for us, our big challenge always is a level playing field internally in Europe, as of course there were companies, also if I could hear Jan, in Czech Republic, companies like Danzer Group or Decospan Group, we were already. And then of course, all the investments have been made to be a proactive companies, as a lot of the Europeans are. And then, of course, by postponing that, this gives us a competitive disadvantage compared to other companies who did not do that, because we all know the concept of opportunity cost. So every euro we invest in complying to the system with the right purpose, I would say, we could not, of course, invest with our customers. And next to that, we import also a lot of American wood species. A lot of the American walnut, which is a very key, I would say, the second largest wood species within our range. And over there also, one of the main challenges we have, besides the fact, of course, that we were ready, is of course also that level playing field, I would say, in terms of the competition on the wood, because of course, as Europe, we are doing the right thing. We need to make sure that the globe is doing the right thing. So we need to convince our suppliers also, and not only the European, but for sure the foreign suppliers, to comply with our system. So we can still find enough raw materials to keep our ecosystem in Europe ready, or keep it viable. Today, we employ around 1,000 people in the group. And again, our vision is very clear. We process the wood close to the forestry where we harvest, and then we transform the wood into products that we now export. And our future vision will be that we transform the final stages of the products on the continent that we sell our goods.
Thank you. That's a great way into this subject. And I wanted to pick up a bit more what you said about this idea of a level playing field, which is something which is obviously key for businesses to have a level playing field and to have a regulatory certainty as well. And just wondered if you could speak a little bit more in terms of what are your concerns at the moment in terms of how the integrity of the EUDR could be undermined, and how this sort of level playing field could also disappear if certain of the changes that are being discussed at the moment could be put into place.
Well, it is extremely important to be clear. So, of course, the level playing field, as a lot of companies, including ourselves, were very proactive. We have done the necessary investments for that. Of course, when you have no certainty, you start doubting. As I said before, every euro we invest on complying, we cannot invest on our purpose, which is the customer. So if we do that and the other ones don't, that is what I mean with the level playing field. So that clarity is extremely important, because also I feel that in our companies, that the mindset of our people, if it constantly changes, we go from proactive to more programmatic attitude, or a wait and see attitude. So it's very, very important that it's clear. Otherwise, we will lose momentum. And even in the companies who are working with that, you lose traction, or you lose credibility in the system from the inside.
And are you seeing at the moment any kind of lack of ambition or less sort of enthusiasm about complying, because there's well, it could just be delayed for another year, so let's hold fire for a little bit?
There's that uncertainty that yes, that is not keeping it again on top of the agenda as it used to be last year. So that the pragmatic attitude is now in place, and that's something, of course, very hard to control. Even though you as a business are in favor for certain things, you know how the mindset of people work, and so that is how it goes. So for us, also need to know we have 2 full-time equivalents on the topic, but we have another 8 of them who are like it's part of their tasks. And I would say we invest like 20% of the time on the EUDR, of course, also negotiating with suppliers and so on. You will not bring up a topic again if you have done such a big change tragic last year that now again, will it come, will it not come? So that is what we feel. It's losing momentum, the unclearness, I would say, besides momentum of when it's going to start. So it's extremely important that we go ASAP to clarity on the EUDR.
Great, thank you. That was super clear, thanks. And now I'd like to move to Anders Tivel, who is a forest owner in Sweden. Anders, do we have you?
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. So I will talk from the point of view of a forest owner. I'm a forester by education, and I work with forestry for some 50 years. So from my perspective, the effects of climate change that we can see right now sweeping through much of Southern Europe, they are dramatically changing the conditions for forest management. We are forced to abandon the narrow focus on volume production and plantation forestry. Forest management needs to support the strengthening of resilience in the forests, so that the forest can withstand extreme weathers that will be normal because of climate change. Today we can see more wildfires, more frequent and longer droughts, and forests being destroyed by insect attacks. An example is Germany, where in 2018, 1,200 square kilometers of forest were affected by spruce bark beetle, and resulting in huge economic losses. These disturbances are, of course, a result of climate change, but the extent of destruction is a result of plantation forests being very vulnerable and lacking the resilience that the primary forests have, and natural forests. Forest plantations that only 25 years ago were regarded as a good investment, they are today a high-risk project, and that's very difficult to take in. The EU Deforestation Regulation will prevent that existing resilient primary and naturally regenerated forest will be transformed into these vulnerable plantations. Furthermore, the regulation aims to support resilience, biodiversity, and variation in the forests, and ensure that they prevail. These are properties that are necessary in face of climate change. However, we cannot stop forestry, so using selective logging is a possibility to take out products from these forests and retaining existing resilience. My own forest is a good example. I stopped exercising plantation forestry long ago. Actually, I started 30 years ago. And instead today, I only do selective logging. The result? Today I have an economy equally good as with plantation forestry. Biodiversity is richer, the forest is sequestering much more carbon, and resilience is retained. Finally, regarding the form to fill in for forest owners, the technical application, I do not see any problem with that. The information required on location, volume of timber, and species is easily accessible to me. In fact, many forest owners in Sweden already share this information with the forest agency to get authorizations for doing logging. In my case, the logging entrepreneur will be tasked with uploading all this information. So this is just a tool for working with a much bigger issue of deforestation. So I think if a tool is not good enough or sharp enough, then sharpen it. To me, this is a non-issue. The important issue is to retain resilience, health, and production in the forests. And these are properties that are threatened by the changing climate today. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders. And that was a very passionate speech and very clear in terms of the threats that are there, very real threats in Europe. It's not some distant problem. You talked a lot about resilience. Perhaps you could explain a little bit more how the EUDR would help to build this resilience into European forests, not just in terms of environmental resilience, but also economic resilience.
you see, there are many forests now that are, I mean, here in Sweden, we see that the annual growth of the forests are actually decreasing. And we wonder what is going on. Is it drought? Is it lack of rain? Or are there any other reasons? So this is one thing that is showing that we are in a very difficult and actually dangerous situation. And these forests that we're talking about, the naturally regenerated forests and primary forests, they have a resilience that is built up over thousands and thousands of years. What didn't work from a system perspective is gone long ago. So what's there now today, these are the most resilient forests we have. So don't destroy it.
And the EUDR in that, what role does the EUDR to really change the dynamic there? Can you sort of draw a direct line between the EUDR and what you're saying needs to happen?
Well, the DR is actually telling that don't cut down these forests and replace them with plantations, because these plantations are very vulnerable. And that is why I find it so extremely important that this regulation is coming in place.
Okay, great. Thank you. Super. And it was interesting as well that you were so optimistic as well in terms of the information essentially is already out there. So that's also good to hear. I'd like to now move to a slightly different angle. And Tara from Earthsight is going to speak to us from an NGO point of view. Thanks, Tara. Tara, sorry, you're also muted.
Yes, that's important. Hello, thanks everybody. Nice to be here with you. I'm going to skip over my introduction slightly because of time, but I just wanted to start by saying that our years of work on illegal timber have shown that there is a pressing need for consumer country regulation to oversee the trade in FRCs and for that regulation to be strong and robust. And that regulation has manifested. It's called the EUDR. And my sort of talk is going to cover three main points. The first point is why the EUDR is a very much improved successor to the EUTR, which is where most of my experience has laid for the last few years. The second point is about how the EUDR is good for not just for forests, but also for a robust EU economy and industry, which is what we've seen from some of our interactions with industry members. And the third point is about why it's very important to retain the EUDR in current form and reject last-minute, ill-thought-out attempts to water it down. So going to the first point, it's about how the EUDR improves on the EUTR. So Earthsight has spent nearly 10 years investigating illegal timber supply chains from all over the world to the EU in violation of the EUTR. We've presented at many EUTR stakeholder meetings, often collaborated with officials to good effect. While the EUTR is a very important law that has seen some benefits, it has not lived up to its promises in practice. But many of the EUTR's weaknesses have been recognized by policymakers after their extensive consultations with stakeholders over years, as well as the Commission's own studies on the efficacy of EUTR, for example, and lessons it's taken from that. The resulting law, the EUDR, has several key improvements that should make it a more effective law in preventing illegal timber from entering the EU. So one of these improvements, obviously crucially, is geolocation as part of due diligence. So the EUTR also required due diligence statements to be lodged and due diligence to be conducted, but the geolocation, gathering of geolocation information will drastically strengthen that. So this gives competent authorities access to data about where timber is coming from as a matter of course, whereas under the EUTR currently, it can be requested on a case-by-case basis, but under the EUDR, that will be available to accompany shipments as a matter of course. This geolocation data obviously equips competent authorities with key information to compare harvest locations to declared volumes and species and so on and so forth. It helps detecting laundering For example, some of my work investigating illegal supply chains from Brazilian forests and, illegal logging hotspots like Para in Brazil, we've seen that it's really, really common for timber from different concessions, both federal and, regulated concessions, as well as, indigenous territories and protected areas and so on, to be sent to the same timber mill and then sort of mixed up there and laundered there, and then sent on to the US or EU. So providing geolocation data to accompany shipments would allow authorities with the tools that they need to be able to verify those supply chains and the legality of them. The second way in which it massively improves on the EUTR is that it provides for minimum enforcement checks or for minimum thresholds for enforcement. This is really important because we've seen under EUTR that there was very patchy and uneven enforcement. There was a lack of level playing field as a result, because some member states would be enforcing much more effectively than others, making timber sort of be routed through one member state rather than the other. For example, we've seen that with some of our most recent work. For example, one of the things we read is about how there's less than 1% of all timber imports into the EU was apparently checked. This is from a 2023 piece of report that we read. Of those checked, 38% were found to be non-compliant under EUTR. So it's clear that much more enforcement activity is needed. Several member states were also found not to be properly implementing or enforcing the EUTR, which actually resulted in warnings, even by the Commission, and so on. And then the EUDR, on the other hand, will really solve that issue or go a great way towards solving that issue, because it sets these minimum thresholds for checks, which is really important. We've also made the case about how it's not just about the numbers of checks, it's about the quality of the checks. You can read an advice note that we put out recently about EUDR enforcement, if that's of interest. The third way in which we believe the EUDR will, massively help crack down on the illegal timber trade is by extending obligations to downstream suppliers. So EUTR did have some information collection requirements for downstream suppliers, downstream importers, but the EUDR takes that much further. So what we saw on the EUTR, for example, is that shell companies would often be used to import illegal timber from Ukraine, for example. So even really large, like international paper companies and international EU producers, we've linked them to imports from shell companies. So these shell companies would be the first point of import and the operator under the EUTR. And then these large companies would be the real receivers of the wood. In most cases, the wood would be going directly to them, but these middlemen companies would bear the legal responsibility. So that loophole has been sort of, closed by the EUDR, which will require more extensive collection of information downstream as well, including knowing more about where products are coming from. The second point I wanted to make is about how and why the EUDR is not just good for forests, but it's good for business. It will expose Europe to, Europe is currently very exposed to illegal timber, and it undermines businesses who are genuinely attempting to practice, sustainable forestry, source from sustainable forests, and also EU-based producers who might be competing with illegal imports, as I think my colleague Peter Jan touched upon, fellow panelist. So, for example, major European plywood producers and companies have made an effort to diversify their supply chains, and they're competing recently following sanctions, for example, and they're competing with illegal imports of products from outside of the EU. These sanctioned goods, as our research has recently found, are usually routed via third countries. And so right now under EUTR, there is no minimum threshold for checks on those third countries. There's no geolocation requirements for those third countries as a matter of course. So under the EUDR, armed with information on geolocation, for example, enforcement agencies could act much more effectively on complaints sent to them and verify the origin of goods to make sure sanctioned goods are kept out of the EU market, for example. Many of these EU producers have actually been very active in sending EUTR complaints. They've tried to leverage the EUTR to good effect. And I know that many of them will be looking forward to the, to the more progressive, the more sophisticated tools that the EUDR will provide, key of which is the, geolocation information. So yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting thing that we've observed in the last few years about the, the competition from illegal imports. And the last point I just wanted to make quickly is about the no risk proposal and the sort of importance of keeping the text of the EUDR as is, because that's really, really crucial to seeing this effective enforcement that we're, hoping to see under the EUDR. So countries like China, for example, are very well-known laundering routes for timber from all over the world. We've documented this recently, but there's been multiple, no end of reports and studies that have shown illegal wood from China entering EU supply chains. And so this no risk proposal would make these middleman countries like China, but also other countries like Turkey, Kazakhstan, and Georgia that we've written about recently as laundering routes for sanctioned plywood, for example, could make them no risk. So if they're labeled no risk, that would mean competent authorities don't have to perform any kind of minimum, number of checks or anything on them. It also means that they wouldn't have to, traders wouldn't have to collect geolocation information. So competent authorities wouldn't be equipped with the tools they need to debunk false origin claims, which we've seen routinely being presented. So many of these countries don't actually have birch forests, for example, just as an example, but they'd be using false harvest claims to cover their imports. And at the moment, while EUTR authorities can go off and request that on a case-by-case basis, to have that routinely entered into in a systemic way would go much further towards clamping down on the illegal trade. So yeah, I mean that brings me to the end. As I say, enforcement will be key, but yeah, it's very important that the law is kept as is, and we look forward to seeing it come into force very soon.
Thanks, Tara. You had the whole difficult problem of talking about the whole world in 6 minutes, which was quite a challenge, but you did a good job. I just wanted to follow up quickly in terms of enforcement, which is always an issue for EU laws, in particular EU environmental laws. Do you see the requisite action is starting to happen within member states to be ready for EUDR, or do we need to see a speeding up of action at a member state level so that the enforcement that you've talked about will actually sort of be put into practice?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been following, my colleagues have been following the ins and outs of different competent authorities and their states of readiness. And I understand it's quite a mixed bag as far as their readiness is concerned, which is understandable given the challenge at hand. But I'm left with a strong impression, as Jan has pointed out, that many of them have started adapting way in advance already. They've been preparing for years. Many of them have really ramped up efforts. Funding has been ramped up to several of the competent authorities in recent months, according to information I've had, from talks with them. And they're ready for the challenge at hand. And that's our job as NGOs as well, to sort of support that and sort of provide the information they need through complaints focusing on key regions, for example, in future, to draw their attention to particular hotspots and so on. But I think the law itself will give a lot more tools to them, that current legislation doesn't. And so when those complaints are filed or when those challenges are faced, I think they will be, much more effectively be able to go off and look at those complaints. But yes, I mean, one key point we have made is, as I mentioned before, about quality rather than quantity. So it's the biggest the biggest companies really who are responsible for the wide share of imports of deforestation or forest risk commodities rather. And, so often what tends to happen is that the small traders, because they're the ones that don't submit due diligence, statements and so on in a proper format and blah, blah, blah. And whereas the big traders have the systems in place, but it's the verification of those systems, and it's the, checking of the information they are sending, which is so crucial to really tackling, the problem at hand. It's not just whether people have a due diligence statement or system in place. It's about how truly that system reflects their sourcing practices on the ground, and whether that's connected to any human rights abuses or, logging in biodiverse forests, etc. So yeah, enforcement will be key, but yeah, I think we're all, you know, collectively gearing up for the challenge at hand, and it's really great to be in the room with these people, with this group. Yeah, you know, with that message.
Super, Tara. Thanks very much. I'd now like to move to FSC, which is a certification body, and Anand Punja, you're going to talk about the EUDR from your point of view.
Thanks, Philippa. Can you hear me okay? Yep.
Yep, all good.
Great, thanks. Just going to correct you there. We're not actually a certification body, we're a scheme owner. So we own and manage the scheme, the FSC certification scheme. Certification bodies are the auditors. A mistake that many people make, first of all. It's just yeah. Look, we've been behind the EUDR for a long time. FSC is in existence for 30 years now, and we believe we've played a role in moving the way that trade in the forest commodity sector works over the last 30 years to get that readiness, first for EUTR and now for EUDR. I think Tara has picked up on some really key points in terms of the gaps that have been closed between the EUTR and EUDR, and we'd agree with pretty much all of those, I think, and especially the systemic data gaps that were kind of providing loopholes in EUTR to EUDR. So overall, we think we've played a role in getting industry there, and what we find with EU regulations more generally is that once businesses, or once the EU, the Commission see that businesses as ready, then they'll put a law in place, and we feel like we've played a significant role in that. Our role has really been, as we've been supporting the EUDR and its journey to where it is, where it was a couple of years ago when it became law, and where it is now, in terms of its implementation readiness and the tools available for stakeholders to use more broadly, in particular business stakeholders. We've been looking at how our certification scheme more broadly in its fullest can be used, but also its different parts as well. So when I say the different parts, one of the examples I'll give here is the risk assessment work that we do across a number of different countries. By the end of this year, we'll have 20 risk assessments out for priorities countries where FSC supply and volumes kind of flow through. So that's how we've identified our prioritization, and another 20 will start this year, ready for the end of next year, and hope and continue in that way as well. That's our role. We want to ensure that certification and EUDR fit well. We've had to align ourselves and adapt our own systems. Certification and the concept of due diligence in particular in EUDR haven't fitted that well. So we've had to look at how our certification system is adjusted so it can be used for due diligence purposes, as well as the certification side of things in terms of that leads to consumer labeling. Ultimately, we do believe that there is readiness out there, and our standards in particular show that readiness. There's a very good fit. There's been a number of studies done, and at that forest level, there's a very good fit in terms of what our forest standards in FSC world say about and cover the aspects of EUDR. So those companies that are sourcing FSC certified timber that originate from FSC certified forests, we believe that all of that data is going to be there and ready, and then it's about getting that flowing through the system. And that's where we've had to do a little bit more additional work in our system. It's been a pretty our system to kind of trace products and information on products has been very paper-based up to now, and as digitization speeds up, we're looking at how we can also speed that aspect of our work up. So the infrastructure that helps businesses to carry that data and to show that where they're sourcing from are responsible and deforestation and degradation free sources as it comes to timber as well. So we're heavily investing in our digital infrastructure. Blockchain is part of that for the traceability aspect as well, but also we expect our risk assessment platform to be available in the next month or so, which is effectively our risk assessment work made more accessible through kind of mapping, visualization software that will be available through the FSC website. Yeah, and we don't have a lot in common with our site, but we definitely have in common with Tara's call for this no risk, not to water down the EUDR and introduce this kind of no risk category. The core of the EUDR is about due diligence, and that is about risks and assessing and mitigating risks. And in our experience as an organization across 30 years, but the hundreds of staff, thousands of staff that have worked for us, of years of experience of working in that forest governance area, there isn't really a country in the world that doesn't have some sort of risk associated with it, whether it's minutiae or whether it's massive. Yeah, so risk is a really key important to do due diligence, and that's the core of EUDR.
Super, thanks, Anand. Another quick whirlwind tour of the global forestry issues. If the rest of the speakers are putting their cameras back on, because we'll move into the Q&A because we're slightly behind time. One of the questions that one of our attendees has asked us, Anand, is whether you can tell us a little bit more about your support to smallholders outside the EU and how the FSC has been helping them prepare for EUDR. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about that. Thanks.
Sure. So we have country teams in some of the places where smallholders are most where they exist in Europe, outside of Europe as well. At the moment, we're doing a lot of work getting the rubber supply chains in Southeast Asia, which are very smallholder, which are very significant from a smallholder perspective. So we're getting them ready to be able to help their downstream customers comply, because they're not the ones that have to comply, but they have to provide the ultimate data and information to comply. So a lot of that is done through group schemes and through technical assistance through group managers who bring smallholders together in effectively a cooperative type model that they can then have more power balance in a negotiation within a supply chain as well, but also have a much better on the ground technical support to implement the FSC standards is the priority there, but to make sure that they fit with the different requirements that are floating around at the moment as well. There is also a stepwise approach to entering FSC for smallholders, which just gives them a little bit more time. And as long as they're showing that they're moving towards the progress and moving towards ultimately implementing the FSC forest management standards on the ground, then that really helps. And ultimately FSC like these kind of smallholder type plots, when scaled up across group schemes, are really important from a biodiversity perspective as well. In Southeast Asia, you have lots of pockets of good protected areas, but where there is problems is the corridors where animals and big fauna in particular can move around, and that's where we find that the group schemes and the smallholders have a massive role to play in providing those corridors to connect protected areas and highly integrated biodiversity integrity areas as well. So yeah.
Great, thank you, super. Peter Jan, I wanted to come to you because there's a couple of questions for you. So one, what systems has DICOSPAN set up to prepare for EUDR compliance? And I think you've already mentioned it a bit, but in terms of what's needed now to keep the momentum going, and if you could perhaps give a bit more detail on that, what you'd like to see, I suppose, from the Commission, member states, etc., to keep this on the rails. Thank you. Sorry, you're still muted.
Yes, my apologies. So the software that we use is a command center from 11 Foundry. That is the system which we put in place. Now, in order to keep momentum, from our side, I think we are all working on that. We are internally. We can continue with this. So that's mean internally I can keep the momentum pretty okay. I mean, the clarity is needed to go back to our suppliers to prepare from the forestry back up. And in Europe, that's not difficult to convince the people because everybody is pretty well aware of what's coming. When we negotiate with our US suppliers, that's a whole other animal. The local market is big and it doesn't require any of the certification. So for us, the reason why we need that clarity is that we can go back on the table on the regions where there is no level playing field. And the US is the best example. It's an important region for us in our industry, at least. I mean, so walnut, oaks, and we do fight. We do need to convince them about something that other buyers do not need to do. So, like in Asia, except when the Asians are of course exporting to Europe or the local market. And so for that is my main thing. If I look at overseas areas, I need clarity so we can go back at the table with our suppliers and convince them to prepare. If not, it will be again a very short time that we have to prepare ourselves, and then all the problems will start. But again, I think that is the most important message for me: clarity. That is the only thing that we are asking as an industry.
Great, thank you. Jan, I wanted to come to you now. And in terms of what extra support, I mean, you sound like things are on the right way forward, but is there extra support that you need from the European Commission now to make sure that you can move forward with the EUDR? And then a second question to you is also about illegal timber imports and whether you're concerned about them and what will be the impact, or what do you think the impact of the EUDR will be on illegal timber imports?
Yes, I absolutely agree that we need clarity and predictability of the regulations. And this is something that is really now the ball is on the side of the European Commission and the member states. I believe that we really need to work together on harmonization. And the Commission and the politicians need to be clear about the intentions with all environmental regulations, because the EUDR is not a self-standing regulation. It's the part of the complex web of regulations. It's a part of the whole system. And if the system is not consistent, then there will be loopholes. So that's the main point from our side. And the clarity is not only, let's say, predictability of regulation, but also predictability of implementation. And so this is something that needs to be addressed. And of course, we are trying to work on this as best as we can. But of course, I think that it was mentioned by other speakers that the overall atmosphere is changed in the let's say, for example, from the perspective of the European Parliament. I believe that it's possible to say it clearly, because it's not that different parliament that adopted the regulation and now is working against it. So.
Yeah, indeed, things have changed a little bit in Brussels compared to where they were prior to the European elections. And just perhaps in terms of illegal timber, whether you had anything to say around that?
Yes, I absolutely agree with what was said from the part of our side, because the competent authority in the Czech Republic and also other member states were trying to cooperate as best as possible with the NGOs and international organizations. We used the information from different NGOs as a basis for substantiated concerns in the EUDR, and it's also important tool in EUDR. And of course, if the implementation is not harmonized in the whole European Union, then there will be loopholes and possibilities for the operators to, let's say, bypass the regulation. And we see it day by day. And especially it was mentioned on the example of plywood and the no risk category, for example, for specific third countries.
Thanks, Jan. Anders, in terms of, you mentioned that most of the data or the information you'd need is sort of out there. So somebody wants to know, how readily available is geolocation data? Is it there, but you'd have to access it, or is it very easy to get hold of? Anders, you're on mute, sorry.
Yeah, the information is available. You know, the logging I'm doing, I'm taking out huge, big trees. So I need a big harvester to do it. I mean, they are very modern. They have computers, they have everything. So they measure every tree they are cutting, and then they know the species and then the diameter, they know the volume. So everything's there, and the GPS is also there. So there is nothing new that is needed to be invented.
And I don't know if you speak to foresters in other countries, but is that similar, do you feel, in other countries, or you're not sure?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Jan, I don't know whether you'd speak to that, whether you feel that where the Czech Republic is sort of more in advance of other countries, if you speak to other competent authorities, or is that most countries at similar level?
I believe that the information is there. There is this problem how to get the information that already exists somewhere in the system on the for the benefit of the forest owners. So situations differ. Of course, some forest owners are not using the, let's say, advanced technology, but I think that there is also a role of the competent authorities or member states to support the small forest owners to get this information correctly when it exists.
Super, thank you. And Tara, I wanted to come to you as well, because you mentioned sort of the illegal imports, the work that needs to do, and this idea of not moving to a zero risk category. I mean, do you think that, is there a real understanding within the EU and policymakers, do you think, around the sort of dangers of introducing this zero risk category, or is that argument still need to be made? And perhaps you can make it very clearly in terms of why this is not helpful in terms of the work that you're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the EUDR is, as currently drafted, as mentioned before, has been the result of a really extensive process. So it's the danger when such proposals are drafted to forget that there's actually been years of consultation, negotiations. You know, there was an overwhelming majority of consumers, for example, that voted for a strong law to regulate deforestation-free products. You know, back in the day before, in the initial days of the EUDR. So, you know, there's a danger of forgetting that context when such proposals pop up from member states, and all the us as NGOs are obviously scrambling to counter those, you know, those efforts to water down the EUDR. But yes, that's the first thing I think I'd like to say, to remember what a long road it's been, and how close we are to the end, you know, towards getting this law. And this is really, you know, the most meaningful attempt by the EU, really landmark attempt, you know, not seen in any jurisdiction before in the world, to take responsibility for its footprint on the world's forests, and to sort of like help have some accountability for you know, the destruction we're wreaking on the natural world, I suppose, to put it in a sort of flowery way. But yeah, I mean, I think this no risk proposal, it's very interesting that, you know, it's just clearly, so, you know, the way that no-risk countries would be defined was, you know, they're proposing that it's based on countries with low deforestation rates and countries that have, you know, good legal frameworks, for example. But I mean, I think China is the most blatant example here, even though I could give a number of other examples of why, you know, so China would fall into that category because, you know, deforestation or degradation in its own forests would probably be seen to be minimal. And, you know, one could argue that they have, you know, robust legal frameworks and so on and so forth to regulate their own forests. But that's not at all taking into account the huge volumes of timber that pass through China and into the EU. And so, you know, if we're talking about timber, which is what this webinar is based around, and timber imports, really, that would be disastrous for the world's forests and for the very intention of the EUDR, which is aiming to sort of, you know, take that accountability for our footprint, you know. And so, I mean, because you're talking about, you know, everything from conflict timber, which I mentioned before, and our work is covered, you know, with the Russian, Belarusian plywood imports being routed via China primarily. And the Chinese launderers are extremely sophisticated. They're constantly coming up with new ways, new codes, new methods to circumvent, you know, these sanctions and rules, EUTR as well. They often reference that they can provide EUTR documents very, very confidently, for example, because they're simply providing fake harvest locations. They're providing fake Latvian harvest locations. They're providing fake Chinese Southwest Chinese harvest locations. And all of these things are, all of this information on harvest locations will be required to be captured under EUDR and then can be debunked to be able to say that actually, no, how can that volume of plywood plausibly come out of that region in China, or that quality of plywood come out of that part of China, for example. So that's just one example. But I mean, tropical forest is the same, you know, so the huge volumes of some of the most notorious illegal logging from Africa, African forests, from the Congo Basin, from Southeast Asian forests are all being routed through China. And this has been a shield because the complicated supply chains in China, you know, it's been a shield for European importers as well, because they know that there's minimum traceability, there is minimum scrutiny of their purchases. And so the bad actors in the EU who are buying, from China without, making sure their supply chains are robustly investigated, are allowed to make those purchases with impunity. And I think the EUDR will really help turn that around. However, this no risk rating for China, for example, would just be absolutely disastrous, because as I was saying, it would just mean that competent authorities didn't have any of the minimum required, checks to conduct on those countries like China. It would mean no geolocation. So yeah, I mean, we've argued in a blog, but many others have, about the disastrous impacts that this would have. And the Commission must be very, very firm and reject this in the first instance. If it isn't rejected in the vote next week. Yeah.
Super. Thanks, Tara. And very quickly, just before we finish, I just wanted to ask Peter Jan very quickly. There's a question about how you stop such timber coming into your supply chains already, and if there was already a move towards kind of the demands of the EUDR before it was agreed.
We are already working a long time with our suppliers on this. So we have our own pure wood charter, which is not, of course, exactly the same as EUDR in terms of geolocation of our logging, but we do a yearly audit of our suppliers. As we are not working with traders, we are working with slicers. So we actually we can control much more the logging that is coming from a certain area around the slicing companies. And for that, we do double check on who we work with. Of course, I would say almost 92% of our material is either FSC or PEFC certified, which helps as well. And again, we are not really working, or we stopped working already before, and because of EUDR, more and more with the tropical wood species. So it is a big thing for us. The shift, I would say, the biggest impact on the EUDR and EUTR, even lounge, was the shift from tropical wood species. A lot of people are no longer willing, for sure also in construction, definitely everything which is government related, on touching that. So I think traceability and sustainability became equal argument than design. Not equal, but closer. And for us, we have our own system in place. We reduced our amount of wood species substantially, and certain zones we just avoid. So we don't buy anymore. I think these are the most concrete steps we have taken, or the things I see.
Thank you very much to everybody. I'm very sorry not to be able to continue this discussion because there are more questions that people want to ask, but I need to hand over to Hannah now so that she can summarize what we've heard today and move us to where we need to go in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much to you, Philippa. Thanks to all our wonderful speakers.